Peace. Welcome to another episode of We Charge Colonialism Podcast and Book Club. I am Ikemba, host of We Charge Colonialism Podcast and Book Club. And we have, I need to bring my brother, Frank. Are you with us? Yes, Frank will probably be joining us in a second, and Natasha will be joining us this morning. But appreciate you guys for tuning in and continuing to tune in for people who have been a part of our podcast and book club since the beginning. I want to ask you to like and share this podcast and book club as usual. And if this is your first time joining, make sure that you subscribe to the channel. If this is your first time here, subscribe to the channel. We charge colonialism, and just as the name says, we charge colonialism to any group of people who dominates African people politically and economically. We charge colonialism to the Europeans who came into Africa, snatched, the first group of Africans from the continent and decided to enslave them and remove them from their homeland. We charge colonialism to those who came to the continent and decided to settle on the continent and politically and economically dominate and socially dominate African people on the continent and around the world. So this history, 500, 600-year history that we have with the development of this economic system, the system that continues to oppress and exploit African people all around the world. We charge colonialism, and we're here to raise people's consciousness to this relationship, so that we can take the necessary steps to overturn this colonial relationship and these contradictions. Peace, brother Frank. You want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, peace, everyone. This is Frank, host for the Revolutionary Repatriation Educational Lecture Series. Welcome you all this morning.
All right. Natasha, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Peace, everyone. My name is Natasha X, and I am a part of the Northeast Political Prisoners Coalition. I am also an educator.
Right on. And we're going to do some educating this morning. I hear echo. Do y'all hear it? Frank hears it. What could that be? All right. I think I'm good now. Cool. So again, appreciate all of you tuning in. It's been weeks since we had a podcast. The last time we was together, we were still covering Stolen Black Labor by Chairman Omali Yeshitela. We're moving into a new book, Set the World on Fire by Keisha Blaine. I'm really looking forward to digging into this book, examining this book. There's a link in the chat for those who want to follow along when we get to the reading, which is in the second part of the podcast. But we usually start off with a weekly roundup covering stories around the world as it pertains to African people, as it pertains to us. So the first thing I wanted to just cover was the Malcolm X Academy. And I wanted to highlight this. I'm going to share my screen and, get into this story briefly. All right. So Malcolm X Academy, make sure you guys are able to see that. All right. So Malcolm X Academy, reviving Panther's legacy in 2023, drawing on the inspiration from the Black Panther Party and the PAIGC, which is that the African Independence Party for Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde. Emil Cabral, that was his part. I think he was one of the founding members of that party. And the Zapatistas Chiapas School, the Malcolm X Academy, is a welcome addition to the history of African struggle in the United States. Revolutionaries across America are reviving the legacy of the Black Panther Party through education. I had a chance to speak with DJ Bilal and Jordan McGowan, two educators at Malcolm X Academy in Oak Park, Sacramento. According to Jordan, Malcolm X Academy for African Education is a K-8 community school in Oak Park, Sacramento. MXA was established in October 22 and just began our second school year. Expanding on that, DJ pointed out that the idea for Malcolm X Academy came about during the uprisings across the world in 2020 in support of Black liberation. They hope to expand this model to other cities in the coming years. Being a school teacher myself, I conducted this interview for two purposes. Firstly, I wanted to understand the revolutionary movement in the USA and where it stands throughout the tumultuous 21st century. Secondly, I wanted an opportunity to compare the traditional American public school with the revolutionary pedagogical experiment. So I wanted to highlight this just to sort of bring awareness to the Malcolm X Academy, which is located in Sacramento, and just I guess like sort of highlight the importance of us being able to educate our own, like taking education into our own hands, controlling the education of our children, because under colonialism, what our children are receiving when we send them to the public schools is a colonial education. And Malcolm X, which is fitting, you know, with the name of this academy, what did he say, Natasha? He said, "You can't. You're a fool if you let your enemy educate you." I'm paraphrasing.
Only a fool will allow his enemy to educate his children, I think.
Thank you. I knew you would help me out with that. So you know, I think like this just shows the importance, and it shows that there are people out here who are doing the work and creating those institutions that's necessary for our liberation. I want to put the link to their website in the chat uh, um, right now. But did any of you guys want to say anything about this or the importance of us, you know, controlling our own education?
I mean, there's no subtraction to you know, to this piece of writing. It's just addition, and it is the truth. You know, we cannot allow our enemies to educate us. And to be frank, we keep making the same mistake, especially when it comes to the African continent. Just how, you know, this writing is telling us that you cannot allow your enemy to educate you, right? How can we allow our enemies to train our army to fight for us? It's the same thing. And that's what the African continent, you know, we've been doing. We allow the enemies to come in to train our military, to come in to partnership with our military, to come in to have bases, you know, because at the end of the day, the struggle to which we are going through, the freedom to which we are fighting for, they are the one that cause it. So how can we partnership with them? How can they come to train our army? How can they come to tell us they are coming to protect or to fight for African people when we are fighting against the problems, their attitude, their ways, and you know, their behavior, their oppression, all those things that we are fighting, we are discussing, we are doing it because of them that are created, that have created the problem. And we continue to rely on them for protection. We continue to rely on them for governing. We continue to rely on them, you know, for financial assistance. We continue to rely on them for food security. We continue to rely on them for medical facility or medical opportunity. All these things, you know, Africa or African people have come this far of struggling because of the same people. You know, it's just addition.
And I would just add, oh, no, and I would also just add to what Brother Frank was talking about when it comes to, and what you brought up with this whole story, Brother Kimberly. I think it's always great to see us being able to take control of the school, a school, like educating our children, basically. Um, and I think that not just, there's some, you see some movement happening in South America, and also on the continent itself, to be to combat this Euro Christian colonial education that has been left over in places um, that have been colonized all over the world. And I think that um, when we think about educating our own children, it's directly connected to our conception of what we see the future as and what we see liberation as. Because on the one hand, if we see ourselves as like um, a nation of people, like, African people as a nation, even, African people within the US as a nation that needs to be liberated, then we understand within your own nation, you're going to be educating your own children. But if you see yourself as, you know, an African person that needs to make um, this system work for you, and, not that you want to liberate as your own nation, but that you want to um, be accommodated, or like, integrate into the United States in a way that you have to improve it, that it just needs improvement, then you're not thinking that we need our own schools. Um, so I think, like, seeing more of these schools reemerging is important. And I've also seen that, like, there's, even in New York, that there's like an increased demand for public school. I mean, like, for schools that are more African centered. Now, obviously, that can, there's more to talk about public schools, and or African centered public schools, and African centered education, and us having how it looks different depending on if it's like a public school, or an independent private school, and even what to do in the meantime until we have more of these schools that we need, while most of our kids are still in public schools too. But I think it's always great to see and show people that, like, we can educate our own children, like we have done in the past, pre integration, and Brown versus Board education, that is celebrated as a triumph for us. But no, it has not been. It actually destroyed a lot of the work that we did around education for our children. So I think it's always great to see another independent or African centered school open up. I didn't know, is it independent or is it public?
I believe it's independent. I actually met the brother who, one of the brothers who teach and organized the founding of it. Yeah, it's completely independent. It's not like a public or charter school at all. I'm not sure how many students they have, but I think, like, just to the points that y'all were making, this is important, that that we are completely independent, right? That we're not receiving funding, because that right there will be a contradiction, and it gives the state some sort of influence in shaping what it is that these schools can do, and this is an example of a liberation school, which we need. And liberation schools, you can't be a liberation school and not be, I think, independent of the state. And in the beginning of this article, it talks about the influence of the African Independence Party of Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde, and the Black Panther Party, like these being an influence. I think it also shows the importance of knowing our history. Knowing that history is what influenced, knowing the history of our revolutionary organizations, African nationalist and internationalist organizations, influenced the development or the establishment of this independent school. And I think you talked about in the sense of our children going into these colonial institutions and how it hasn't worked. We have a history of it not working. It's not meant to advance African people where we're at the level where we can contend with our enemies, and our enemies are the one is in control of the very state that we're a part of, that we're constantly trying to integrate into and be a part of. There are historic enemies, and that hasn't changed. No matter how cordial the relationship may seem on the surface, and I think we have to be like very conscious of that. But it has to be grounded in a historical understanding how we got to this point, and our children have to receive that education, and they're not going to receive that in these colonial schools. And that's why there's always a pushback, even with African centered, education. They're talking about, schools trying to integrate that into the schools. What is that going to look like, though? Is it going to, talk about how to advance the interests of African people and build and nation building? It's not going to be any nation building talk within that. And last thing I'll say too is just like we have to be comfortable in saying that we want to build an African nation, and because they have no problem with separating themselves, right? Like somebody just to say that you're an American, an American national, you're separating yourselves from other groups of people when you take the identity of these other nation states. But as soon as you talk about building an African nation, they make it seems there's something like wrong with that. Separating, you're being, racist or whatever the case may be, right? But this is a history of groups of people who have been doing this. We're not talking about anything new or different. The only thing that we're talking about is doing it. Well, I guess you could say different on as far as the scale on an international level. Bringing African people together, no matter where they are, so that we can overturn this relationship. But yeah. But I appreciate this story. I know we talked a lot about this. We can move on to your story, Frank.
Okay, yeah, my stories is
Oh,
regarding.
that Frank. Well, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to uplift the because we're talking about Malcolm X Academy. This November 10th there's going to be the Malcolm X Symposium that is taking place in Boston. I'm going to put the link to the symposium for people to register in the chat. But Malcolm X Symposium honoring the 60-year anniversary of the message to the grassroots speech. That's going to take place in Boston. It's being organized by the Malcolm X committee. I'm a part of that committee as well. So that's November 10th at 1 p.m. in Boston. And it's going to be speakers and guests from all around, all around the America, I guess United States. I don't know. I'm always uncomfortable even recognizing America for some reason. Well, not for some reason, but yeah. But yeah, that was it. I just wanted to uplift that. So I'll put the link in the chat.
All right. Yeah, so for the news, we are going to DRC Congo, Democratic Republic of Congo. So some 2 weeks ago, there have been how do you call it, protest by the Congolese asking or demanding, not even asking. All right, I'm going to use this word, demanding the United Nations to leave DRC Congo. And reason is that the people are saying DRC Congo, let's say the United Nations have been in DRC Congo for decades. All right. on the notion of peacekeeping. So they are saying since the involvement of the United Nations in DRC Congo, there have been no peace. In fact, violence has increased. Violence in the sense that rebels, insurgencies, or how they call it, terrorist activities have increased with the presence of the United Nations. And with the presence of the United Nations, things are getting worse and not getting better. And with the presence of the United Nations, right, the rebels or the terrorist groups are getting more sophisticated weapons. So the concerns of the people is that where are these weapons coming from? Because DRC Congo does not make weapons, all right? And even the neighboring countries, they don't make sophisticated weapons or they don't make weapons. So how come these terrorist groups have the weapons? So are they telling us that the rebels, right, or the terrorist group are more than the United Nations? Because the United Nations is a war-body army. So if the United Nations is a war-body army, how can the terrorist group be more than the United Nations? And then if the United Nations is a war-body army, how can the terrorist group have more weapons than the United Nations? So how can the terrorists be more supported, okay, than the United Nations? All right. So this is the concern of the people. So they are protesting that if the United Nations leave, they will be able to fight for themselves. They will be able to govern themselves. So the United Nations should leave because there is no reason their presence should be in DRC Congo when there have been no peace all along. They have been there for decades, and it has been alleged that the United Nations is also part of the looting of the resources of DRC Congo. And we saw that in the video, I think from 2015 to 2016, when a United Nations truck had an accident, and this truck have about $1 billion worth of gold or mineral resources, okay, in that particular truck. So then, how did the United Nations, how they call it, get or got, or let's say get that trucks full of gold? Okay, how did they get it? Okay, where did they get it? All right, how did they mine that gold? All right, so these are all concerns of the people. So I'm just going to read something here. They said, so in fact, 2 weeks ago, while they were having the United Nations General Assembly here, there was a protest in DRC Congo asking the United Nations to leave. And the army of DRC Congo, all right, went and shot at those protesters, and they killed about 40 how they call it civilian that was protesting for the how they call it, the United Nations to leave DRC Congo. So it says caution, how they call it, caution support for an accelerated withdrawal of peacekeeper from DRC Congo. So I said last week at the UN, Congolese president Felix insisted that on an accelerated withdrawal of the United Nations peacekeeping mission, UNESCO, from his country from the end of 2023 to 2024, but they kind of flip it around. They say 2024 somewhere rather than 2020. Okay, so he's saying they should leave by December rather than 2024. All right, so by December, the United Nations should be out. So he says, I would like to say, he said we would like the Security Council to take the full account of the concrete and realistic demand of the Congolese authorities, declared French ambassador to the United Nations Nicolas de Raven on Thursday, insisting on an orderly withdrawal in close collaboration between the Kinshasa and the UN. UN peacekeepers have been presence in the DRC for nearly 25 years. Imagine that, for nearly 25 years. And the council is due to renew MONUSCO mandate in December. Although Kinshasa, some of the population are cautioning its effectiveness in protecting civilians. With the security crisis in the east of the country counting on abated, several member states have expressed doubt about the advisability of transferring MONUSCO tax to Congolese force on an accelerated basis. The United States is frankly concerned. The United States is frankly concerned that the forces of the DRC and the region are not ready to meet the condition required to ensure the security of the Congolese population, say United States Ambassador Linda Thomas Greenfield. Now, this is what I have problem with, all right? So this Linda Thomas Greenfield, as we all know, she's a puppet, all right? She's a neo-colonialist. She's also a slave to the slave master. But look what she said here. The United States is frankly concerned that the forces of the DRC Congo, that means the DRC Congo, like the army, all right? The army of DRC will not be able to protect the people of Congo, all right? But in reality, let's put it this way. It is the United Nations that have been the army of DRC Congo for 25 years, not the army. But how they call it, not the United States, but UN. The United Nations forces have been the army or a figure of DRC Congo for 25 years. And they have been unable to provide security for the people. They have been unable to defeat terrorists. Let me take this out. Sorry. Okay, they have been unable to defeat, how they call it, the terrorists or the insurgencies group, all these militant groups in DRC Congo. The United Nations have been unable to defeat these people to bring security to the people. All right, so now the people are saying after 25 years, it's better you leave, then we create our own army to protect ourselves. Then you to come and say the army of DRC cannot protect the people. So, I mean, this is what going on. I just thought it was to bring it, but I might be talking about this tomorrow as well. It's going to be in the topic.
Nah, appreciate you bringing this story. Yo, so much, man, so many contradictions. First of all, like the United Nations, they was there, and sort of sat by and watched the assassination of Patrice Lumumba, right? So I'm always going, not only for that reason, but United Nations in the Congo, like what does that really mean? They're there to help facilitate the interests of the colonizers, to keep the peace. For what? Keep the peace so that the continued exploitation and oppression of the Congolese workers, Congolese people can take place, right? That's what else are you there to keep peace for? So, but as long as there is this, continue relationship with these colonizers, whether it's the Chinese coming there to exploit or the Indians coming there to exploit, because all of them, and of course, like the Europeans, because all of them have corporations that are set up in the Congo and they exploit in the Congo for all of its natural resources and its labor, its land, all of that, right? So the Congolese people for over a century now hasn't been able to really have the control over those resources ever since King Leopold, right? Came in there and it became a colony of King Leopold and then transferred over to the Belgium. But I think like when it comes to this, the only way that we can like really resolve this contradiction is by taking control over not just kicking the UN out, but taking control over the resources and being able to demand what this relationship with everybody else, what that's going to look like. They're the cause of the instability. Why is there instability in Congo? Because there's nations and people that are coveting the resources that are in the Congo. They want those resources so that they can put it on this market, and so that they can accumulate wealth in this international capitalist economy, right? And because of this conflict that's happening, whether it doesn't have to be a military conflict, but this economic, competition and conflict that is happening globally, the people of the Congo are suffering as a result of that, right? And they're at conflict with each other, fighting over crumbs, and it's causing the destabilization or the continued destabilization of the Congo and loss of lives. But yeah, no, I appreciate this story, man. The United Nations is a puppet for European powers, so I don't expect anything, from them.
And just to add on this idea of like, okay, yeah, they're peacekeeping. What is the peace? Because everywhere where you see a United Nations peacekeeping mission go, things are still not peaceful. Things are still and sometimes exacerbated in those places. So this idea of like, okay, the United Nations peacekeeping, like I've really never seen any place in the world where the UN has really gone in and helped to really establish peace. I don't think I've seen a record of them doing that anywhere. Um, Especially, considering who they are. Like the United Nations, like I'm so over them at this point, because what is the point here for you to just allow Europeans to continue to control their power? Like when they went into Haiti and brought the cholera, nothing happened to them. Like nothing. They had, and caused thousands of deaths, and there was no consequence or anything. But yet they can try African leaders in The Hague. But you don't ever see any Europeans being tried in The Hague. So it's just like at this point, like, the permanent seats of the Security Council, all by, Western nations that won the war. Like, so it's just like, what is at this point, like, enough with the UN, like enough with the pretending that you're doing something, and even enough with pretending that you know what peace is. Because this idea of peace, whose idea of peace are we talking about, and whose protocols and processes of peace are we talking about? Because what these UN, I feel like most of the ideas around what should be done in the world when it comes to the UN are completely coming out of a Western lens. Like, African people have their own ways, of how they have, naturally for many years, like indigenously, through their own cultures, practice peace and peaceful resolution and conflict resolution. Those are not the things that are being done with the UN peacekeepers. It's a foreign ideas of what peace should be, using the military, using violence on top of that, like using a military, force to be able to do that. And that's not what brings peace. So this whole idea of them feeling like, oh, well, they're not ready for it. No, they're ready for it, because whatever you trying to do, think you've been doing, you haven't been. So like at this point, the UN just like needs to just go somewhere. I'm really over the UN.
Yeah, I mean, ready. And who you have outsiders trying to determine whether you're ready or not. That's a serious contradiction in itself. But again, it's just to continue to facilitate the exploitation that's there. They shouldn't be peace. There shouldn't be peace in the Congo. There should be a lot of hell being raised in Congo, but not against each other. We have to begin to see ourselves as an African people that has, as Marcus Garvey, and we about to get into this right now, with like one aim and one destiny. We have to have that mindset and not see each other as the enemy and struggle with each other over resources. That there's an abundance of resources. All we have to do is begin to determine how it's going to be used, and not let any outsiders determine that. So that being said, though, again, we kind of going to get into Garvey and the UNIA with this emphasis, though, on African women in this particular book. And I'm going to share my screen, and the link to. I did put the link in the chat. I'm going to repost the link right here for those who want to follow along. We're going to be looking at chapter 1. We'll probably spend the next few weeks covering this book right here. And again, like and share. Appreciate y'all joining us and coming back. I know we've been going for a few weeks. Natasha, I know you busy organizing Curve Fest, among other things. So appreciate you. And it was a success, right? Bringing awareness to political prisoners.
It was a great turnout. Definitely we want it to be, to grow next year. But we always want to be in the community, raising awareness and support for political prisoners. And I think we definitely did that.
Indeed. Always got to appreciate the work around our political prisoners, and continue to uplift and promote freedom.
Your voice is coming.
Oh, the echo is back, right?
Yeah.
What about now? Still here.
Still the same.
I don't hear an echo though. That's interesting.
All right.
Everybody go on mute.
All right, go ahead. As long as the viewer are hearing you clear, that's it. So go ahead.
Okay. Sayero says severe feedback, but I think I'm good now. So let's get into this right here. Set the world on fire. Been really looking forward to getting into this. We're going to be looking at chapter 1, Women Pioneers in the Garvey Movement. So April 19th, 1924, Eunice Lewis's editorial, quote unquote, the Black woman's part in race leadership, appeared on the women's page of the Negro World, quote unquote, our women and what they think. A member of Marcus Garvey's Universal Negro Improvement Association, UNIA, residing in Chicago, Lewis crafted a succinct yet powerful article that embodied in the spirit of the quote unquote new Negro woman. There are many people who think that a woman's place is only in the home, to raise children, cook, wash, and attend to the domestic affairs of the house. Lewis noted, this idea, however, does not hold true to the new Negro woman. She continued, the new Negro woman, Lewis insisted, was intelligent, worked equally with men, was business savvy, and most significantly was committed to revolutionizing the old type of male leadership in the UNIA and in the community at large. Her comments, which coincided with the Harlem or New Negro Renaissance of the period, signified a key shift that was taking place within the Garvey movement. Founded by Marcus Garvey with the assistance of Amy Ashwood in Kingston, Jamaica in 1914, the UNIA, originally the Universal Negro Improvement Association and African Communities League, was the largest and most influential Pan-Africanist movement of the 20th century, emphasizing racial pride, Black political self-determination, racial separatism, African heritage, economic self-sufficiency, and African redemption from European colonization. Garvey envisioned the UNIA as a vehicle for improving the social, political, economic conditions of Black people everywhere. From Kingston, Jamaica, Garvey oversaw UNIA affairs before relocating to Harlem, where he incorporated the organization in 1918. At its peak from 1919 to 1924, the organization attracted millions of followers in more than 40 countries around the world. Like many nationalists before and after him, Garvey maintained a masculinist vision of Black liberation and thus believed that Black men would ultimately lead the fight to improve conditions for Black people in the diaspora. Although he was not necessarily opposed to female leaders, Garvey sought to maintain a patriarchal model of leadership in the UNIA, which allowed women to serve as leaders only under the watchful eye of Garveyite men. Moreover, Garvey, as many other Black men during the early 20th century, endorsed Victorian ideas and exhibited the spirit of manliness, a masculine sensibility that emphasized Black men's respectability and ability to produce and provide. Along these lines, Garvey not only upheld the belief that men were the vigilant protectors of Black women and children, but also embraced the view that women's natural place was in the home as a wife and mother. So I mean, we could stop there and build a bit. The UNIA is still the UNIA ACL. That hasn't changed. I know we usually just say the UNIA, Universal Negro Improvement Association, but it's still the African Communities League. I wanted to say that hasn't changed. But I think like this is one thing I think is significant about this reading and this conversation is to understand like some of the contradictions that exist within our movement, where I think under the European system of colonialism and patriarchy, it had this effect and impact on some of the leadership within our movements and the way that we structured and organized. And I think like that mostly came from an influence, I believe on the education and just this idea of European advancement and wanting to emulate sort of like European structures and systems. But there's always, I think that there's been always this tradition among African people, even within our organizations, that resisted that. And I think it's speaking to this with the UNIA, though that there was some influence of European structures and patriarchy. We can see that within the movement, this is before you have a feminist movement or any of that stuff. Like women, I think African women understood that this wasn't part of our tradition, right? And trying to keep the men like honest to the African culture and tradition, way of life, and not be too sort of just enamored by the power of Europeans, because at the end of the day, like their power came at the expense of African people. But that's just one thing I think. I think just like I think it's significant. This book wants to get to. I think the just like uplifting that within our systems, within our movements, there's this constant. The African women weren't like taking a back seat and sort of just like letting the men try to emulate European way of doing things. There was always this structure. I mean, I'm sorry, there was always this struggle to say like, no, this isn't the African way of building systems and building institutions or societies. If that makes sense, trying to flush that out a bit. But did y'all want to add anything to that?
I want to say also too, like Baina Bello, she has the phrase Euro Christian that she always uses when she's talking about Europeans and colonialism and stuff like that. And I think the Euro Christian connection, like the European and Christianity connection, definitely plays a part into it too. I feel like when we're talking about the US or the West, and the European ideals of leadership and societal organization, it's also, the way that you see um the push for, the male dominated um organizational way of doing things, also is connected to that Euro Christian idea um of things. And so I think that it also goes again and points us back to the importance of, when we're thinking about, like you were saying, um African ways of doing things, like, also not so that when we're talking about African ways of doing things, not, it's not, it's also remembering the spiritual aspect of that, like, how your spiritual system, your way of seeing the world, um and the creation of the world, and how it operates, um based on your own spirituality, determines how you see men and women being, working together and organizing together. And I think that spiritual part of it is a huge part of that. And I think the Euro Christian part pushes, the patriarchal dominance of men that, is being pointed out in this particular section. And I think that's, something to highlight, that Christianity part of it. And even thinking, like, more specifically, that Euro Christian part of it, in that kind of way.
Yeah, just to add on about the relationship when it comes to these things, the relationship between the African men, and the African women. Um, it have always been a relationship where both coordinate things in society for the betterment of having a peaceful community, having a peaceful neighborhood, peaceful data and things. And let me just go by a little bit in history back on the African continent. All right. And that is why, like the first piece of writing you brought out, that where we have to be educated by ourselves and not be educated by our enemies, because at the end of the day, it's going to be an education that's going to make you love your enemy and hate yourself. And these are the things we've been fighting with. For example, let's just, like I said, let me go back to the African continent, see how things were done. All right. And even up to now, things are still being done in some places of that, in some culture. Now, on the African continent, men and women work together. Okay. So it was not where like women were not respected, in society and things. I know that there are some culture who do things differently. And just because they do things differently, that does not mean they don't respect women. It just means, they are going by certain culture, certain tradition. For example, all right, in Liberia, especially Lofa County, there is a tribe, there is a culture. A certain time in life, or a certain time in a year, the women going to cook, all right, and the women will never taste that food. They will cook it, they will never taste it. All right, because it's a tradition that they have to perform. And after they cook it, they will leave it on a fire, and the men will come, all right, take that food from the fire, and they themselves, they will what they call that food, and then eat that food. And the women go and get the dishes and wash the dishes and things. And then the women will still cook the overall food. But what I'm saying here is, when it comes to even making farms, all right, there are certain times where the men will be responsible to bridge the farm, and cut down the trees, and then burn the farm, and then clear the farm. All right. Now it will be the women who will go in, all right, to plant the rice. All right. And then after that, it will still be the women who will go and pick the unwanted weed from among, the rice and thing. And then once the rice grow up and it is time for harvest, now both the men and the women, they all get together in different in cool, okay, where they will go today to one person farm and harvest, and then the next day go to another person farm and harvest, and the men will be there beating drums, okay, singing, encouraging the women, and at the same time, the men will be there as well, and along with the women, helping to harvest all of these things. All right. So things were coordinated, in society where women were not left out and men were not left out. All right. And this is why in Africa, all right, or in Asian Africa, or even today Africa, we have queens. So what? So if we have queens who rule like kings, so it's not like women were left behind. But again, if we read the book written by our colonizer, our oppressor, we're going to see a different narrative, because histories have been written, okay, for the benefit of those who write it, and those that will come after them to benefit from it. And that's how Western history have been written, to benefit them and to benefit their children. For that narrative to keep going, have now been written in the interest of African people to whom things were done against them. And that is why, when we're doing these things right in history, even if we want to go by in ancient time, we have to really deeply understand how things were being done and all of those things. And that is what, things like this, books like this, reading like this, piece like this, we need to read it to remind our people, because in contemporary how they call it, Africa, or Western world right now, as we in, that is why they don't encourage African education. The only education they will bring out is starting from the 1600. But if you go beyond that, now you're going to understand some of that. Even if you go beyond that, now you understand that even the Queen of England, they got that system from Africa, how to become a queen. If you really want to go beyond, okay, the African studies, you will get to know that the reason why you have the Queen of England today, all those queens in Europe, they all derive from looking at Africa. And that is why they don't want to always take the history from African people from the 1600.
Yeah, no, appreciate you raising all that. That was a lot of great points you had made, and it just took me back as well, just thinking about the roles within those simple societies. And I mean simple, when I say simple and complex, I mean simple in regards to there wasn't a whole lot of division of labor where people were like specializing in certain areas, right? And fields of work. Um, in those societies, it was very simple, and everyone had a role. Men had a role, women had a role, and no role was more valuable than another, or a person who was, the role of the woman within that society was understood. And you talked about tradition, and the role of men was understood, but no one, because these are communal societies. So, it's not as if, men had control over resources that women didn't have, right? Or that they controlled land that women didn't have. It was shared. Everything was shared within the society. Everybody had a role. But in more complex societies where there's this division of labor, and some roles are deemed more valuable than others, and men were able to capture the economy and have control over those resources, it put women in a position where there was this dependency, and in the patriarchal system, men deemed, they began to institutionalize the role of women and say, hey, you have to stay in that role, a role that was devalued in the system of colonial capitalism. But I know that, like, that's a, kind of like going away from this, but you said a lot that made me think about that history and development. I know it's 5 minutes. Let me see if we just like maybe get like one paragraph or something, a couple paragraphs. That's cool. I'll take that as a yes. Like many black nationalists before and after him, Garvey maintained oh, I read that. Eunice Lewis called for revolutionizing the old type of male leadership, was therefore a direct challenge to the prevailing ethos of black patriarchy and the Garvey movement. Along with a cadre of women during this period, including Amy Jacques Garvey, Mamie de Mina, and Henrietta Vinton Davis, Lewis articulated a new and expansive vision of black women's leadership in the UNIA and in the community as a whole. These women, from a variety of socioeconomic backgrounds and social positions, adopted a proto-feminist stance in which they directly challenged male supremacy and attempted to change the UNIA's patriarchal leadership structure. In their efforts to revolutionize the old type of male leadership, Black nationalist women pioneers created opportunities for women to have greater visibility and autonomy than Garvey originally envisioned. Moreover, they devoted significant attention to women's issues and often defied prevailing gender conventions. In doing so, they articulated many of the same arguments and employed some of the strategies that were fundamental to feminist movements that emerged during the 1960s and 70s. Stop there for a second. Yeah. So one thing I think I was reading, I had a thought too, and I lost the thought, but let's see if I can regain it. But I was thinking, but one thing I was thinking, because this chapter is going to speak about pioneering women. It's going to start off with Amy Ashwood Garvey, right? And I think it's important too. This chapter sort of sets the book off by recognizing these women. When we look at this history of our movements, it is like male dominated when we look at the history and even what we're reading. Most of the books, even on this channel, most of the books we've read was authored by men. I think one time we looked at Claudia Jones, her writings, and we looked at Dr. Help me out, Natasha. Dr. Isis paper. Dr.
Frances Cress Welsing.
Frances Cress Welsing. I was about to say Joy DeGruy. But I don't think we looked at her work. But mostly men we're looking at, and we're looking at this history. We're always looking at, for the most part, the men leaders and how they impacted or had an impact on this movement and their thoughts. But I think it's important that we do look at the role of African women in this movement and reading their thoughts, so that we can develop a better understanding of the African woman struggle within the system of colonial capitalism and dealing with patriarchy, which is something that Black men won't be able to understand. So how can we even really build a serious relationship with African women within a system of patriarchy, European patriarchy, right? And not recognizing that and seeing how it's impacting African women and how even African men may be playing a role if African men are attempting to emulate the system of the oppressor. And that's why revolution is so important in recognizing the contradictions that exist when we're being liberal, when we're adopting patriarchal ideas and way of structuring our organizations. But just like last point, just like the recognition of these women, it gives African women an opportunity to see themselves in the struggle and in the movement, right? Because I think about it, if we're just studying as African people, we're just studying European thought and European leaders and not see ourselves, we're going to be inspired by colonizers, the George Washingtons, the Thomas Jeffersons, like all of these people, founding fathers. And that's a serious contradiction. So we have to recognize the oppressors and the oppression that takes place so that we can overturn it. But did y'all have any thoughts?
I think in connection to what you were saying in terms of, and I think this also goes back to some of the stuff, we've been talking about in terms of having our own social theories. This emulation, this participating in our own oppression type of way. When we're seeking to emulate, that is a way of that leads us into helping, participate in our own oppression in that particular kind of way, because you're seeking to emulate exactly what the exact roles and parts of the system that are made to oppress you. And I think that also, when you were speaking about, emulation and, us taking on the ways of, this particular society and culture, you remember, it also made me think about the quote that, like, I forgot who said the quote, but it was, practicing your own culture. And this is not the exact wording of it, but basically, like, practicing your own culture is the best weapon against oppression. So even when thinking about the ways in which, we're practicing, or, like you were saying too, the thought, like, what's the thought process behind how we're structuring organizations or dealing with each other, or even how we are seeing each other, like thinking about how, like, what parts of those are coming through European ways of knowing, like, built into this society, things that we're doing as part of emulation, versus us looking back, doing a Sankofa, going back and seeing what we were doing, what was working for us, what works for us, like, the things that Frank was mentioning, and us really getting to know, okay, what is, the cultural, spiritual lifestyle of African people that we want to follow, that we want to emulate, that is, African, not that is European, and, sits on top of, a European ideology, is threaded through with European ideology. And I think um thinking more about, okay, what are, like I was saying before, like, what are the spiritual and social practices of African people that we want to emulate when we're thinking about how we're working with each other, how we're building organizations, um and, connecting that back to our own social theories that sit on the philosophies of African people, not of Europeans. Because even a lot of these ideas that exist today, if you were to look, I mean, when I say ideas, I mean like popular ideas in mainstream America. You will look through and see that there is a real philosophical thread of European thought. Like, you will not go back and see the philosophical thoughts of African people if you're threading through the trajectory of this idea that has come about, and it's come about through European philosophers and ideas. And so that's one of the things that I try to do now when I think about, okay, what is it? Where is this thought coming from? Where is this idea of how we should fix things coming from? Because it's even like when we're talking about, like they're talking about in that particular paragraph, proto-feminism, but even this idea of feminism as a way to address, women's issues in America. And then, you have outgrowths like, Black feminism and things like that, that is also threaded through a European philosophy that is addressing a particular European way of living, because we know that's Europeans devalued their women throughout their societies. And that's part of the process. And so, you have a European created society that then produces European ways of thinking about how to address that issue, versus we find ourselves within, a culture that is not ours. So how do we then look at our culture? I mean, how do we then look at our situation based on, understanding the history of it? And how do we say, okay, how do we address this based on our culture, right? What, based on our understandings of how we interact and do stuff within African society that benefits us as a whole.
I think that question, somebody, Rooney B asked the question. I think it was referring to something you said. Does money, or how money is perceived and used generally in current times, is a part of this cultural practice? I think that was addressed to you. You're shaking your head, Frank. I was
going to say, is it addressed to me?
I believe so.
Oh, well, I mean, I would definitely say, does money and how money is perceived and used generally in current times part of this cultural practice? And in this cultural practice, I'm assuming is the cultural practice of the like the European societal cultural practices. I'm assuming is what the cultural practice they're referring to. And I think, yeah, of course, I think so too. I think money as well. Like I think all of it. Like, you know, there's the idea that there's no such thing as a cultural, meaning that, you know, you're never without a culture. You're either practicing your culture or you're practicing somebody else's culture.
Yeah,
And
you have
so
a lot of
knowing that we're
culture.
so, yeah, knowing that we're so wrapped up within this system's way of knowing and thinking and seeing the world, yeah, that we see money the same way, and we operate with money in the same way. Like a lot of us, you know, it even takes a lot of work to recognize. It's like there's a, and try to make this short, but there's a saying that says like a fish doesn't know it's wet. Like when you grow up within a particular society and system, it's so ingrained in you, it feels so, like, you know, natural to you that it just seems like, oh, this there's nothing to question here. Like, of course this is how things are. So it even takes a lot of work to recognize that no, there is other ways of operating. There are other ways of seeing the world and seeing other people and interacting with other people. So when it comes to money, it's the same thing. We are completely seeing money through um a European way of thinking. And a lot of people don't even see money as just a tool. It's a tool that exists in this society in this particular way for specific particular aims. And the same way when we think about money and how we can address our issue when we're thinking about money, we also have to ask ourselves those same questions. Like, you know, what are the philosophical understandings behind money and commerce and economy, and how economy is connected to somebody's culture and how they see the world. Like everybody isn't like, you know, every culture is not like, oh yeah, let's, you know, use money in this particular way and that its aim should be this particular thing. Like it's all based on your culture, the roles in which you feel like your society needs in order for it to operate. Like this way of using money and seeing money is completely based on, yeah, this particular way of practicing
And let me
seeing the world.
Yeah, let me just sorry, Natasha.
No, I'm good. That was the end of it.
Okay, let me just add to what you're saying. And because because the question is phrased, also adding culture to it, that's why I want to add, little bit of flavor to it. And like you said, yes, money does influence stuff. And again, it relates to the same Western education, Western narrative, Western way of seeing things. But before then, right, let's just go back to the African continent. Now, even into current situation as we see some things right now, right? Before then, in our African setting, in our African practices and tradition, right? This is what used to do, people used to do. There are some practices, okay, or most practices, right? When it is going on, it was not about money. It was about togetherness. It was about unity. There were certain practices that were being performed. It was about bringing the community together. It was about education. It was about, portraying, messages to the younger generation of how things need to be done, of how unity need to be done, or how to look at your brother, how to look at your sister, how to look at the community, how to look at your neighbor. All right, that's how things are done. All right, and even up to today in traditional Africa, things are still being practiced without even money. People come in and give their services. Okay, performing arts, performing tradition, and all of those things. All right, it brings togetherness. It's about heritage, it's about a culture. But now in today's society, some part of today's society, because Africans have traveled to the West because of Western education, because of Western mindsets. When you see some of these things going on and Africans are performing some of these arts, all right, it is the same Africans who have Western education, Western knowledge, will then say, you guys are doing all these things and you are still poor. You guys are doing all these things. Why can't you do these things or to transform your life? Who told you said those people are poor? You are thinking they are poor, but in reality, they are not poor. Their souls are happy. Their bodies are happy. They feel pleased in doing it because that's how it has been. It's about heritage, it's about bringing people together. All right. But unlike the Western narrative, the Western churches, all right, that are infused into the African belief and the African way of believing how spirituality works. In today's society, right, in Western society, and especially African people have taken it. You that give the more tithes and the more offering, you are recognized than the person who is not giving tithes, or than the person who is giving little tithes or little offering. The more money you put into the offering basket, that's how they look at you as member of the church. That's how they pay respect to you. And so money have been used as a tool to influence way of life, to influence society, to influence our thoughts, to influence our belief system. Money have been used as a tool to get us far away from what we believe in, our identity. Money have been used. So money is a tool used to influence culture, to influence belief.
I'm not even going to get started about money. I'm gonna say that for the next one, for sure. And Frank, make sure you tune in tomorrow. Frank is going to be on 1 p.m. Eastern time, right?
Yep.
So make sure you tap into that. You alluded to the topic. Are you going to continue to cover your topic from earlier today?
Yeah, I mean, that is just going to be part of the topic for tomorrow.
Okay.
But tomorrow is going to be about Libya as well. So if you see the title there, it says, I think criminal Obama, Clinton, NATO, kill another 20,000 Libyan, so yeah.
Yeah, these fit. Make sure you tap into that. Frank is our most consistent podcaster. Boy, don't miss a Sunday, man. I'm inspired, man. I'm trying. It seems like something always come up, man. I'm like almost there, and then something come up. But yeah, appreciate you. Keeping We Charge Colonialism, at least like we know weekly we gonna have something going on. And appreciate all of y'all too for tapping in with us this morning. We will be back next Saturday covering this book. I think we'll continue with chapter 1 before at least another week before we move on to the next chapter. The link to our WCC book club is in the description. In the chat, you can find it as well. Again, appreciate you all for tuning in. And until next time, man. Peace, black power. Make sure you organize in colonialism and colonial capitalism for sure. Peace, huh?